Spirit of God, my work will confront me with difficult situations and challenges that I would rather not encounter. Such situations lead me to doubt whether I have what it takes to serve you in this role. They make me wonder whether someone else might do a better job. And yet, here I am. Spiral and swirl within me now to rouse the hidden strengths that lie deepest at my core strengths that come from you, but that I rarely remember to stir. Arouse perseverance to work through obstacles. Arouse boldness in the face of adversity. Arouse courage. Yes, my Lord, arouse courage. Amen.
Amen.
Okay, letting someone else in. So as I said, we have the great pleasure to have Ed Curtin and Marianne Sturterman with us this evening. They both serve on the Institute Ethics Committee. Ed Curtin is the president of Mercyhurst Preparatory School and has over 25 years of teaching experience in the theology department. He has spent almost his entire career at Mercyhurst Prep. Ed received a Master of Arts in Pastoral Studies and Religious Education from Gannon University. He served Mercyhurst Prep as assistant principal from June 2011 until his appointment as president in July of 2015. He was named a Golden Apple Teacher in 2008. In addition, Ed serves as Mercyhurst Prep's athletic director, served as Mercyhurst Prep's athletic director. He was an adjunct instructor in the Religious Studies Department at Mercyhurst University and served as the youth minister and confirmation director at St. Julia's Parish in the Diocese of Erie. Marianne Sturterman is in her 24th year at Assumption High School in Louisville, Kentucky. After years spent as an English teacher, assistant principal, and principal, she now serves as the director of campus ministry. Her department manages the 4-year overnight retreat and service programs, and she, in recent years, has implemented advocacy education and Christian leadership programs. She has a BA in English from Bellarmine University, an MED in secondary education from the University of Louisville, and an MA in school administration from Spalding University. She also teaches ESL writing virtually to students in China and does freelance writing on the side. So Marianne and Ed, thank you for being with us this evening, and I'm going to turn things over to you.
Thank you, Kim. And if you could let me share my slides, that would be great.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's all right.
And while we're doing that, I'm just going to quickly thank you for the introduction, Kim, and say hello to everyone. And I love the prayer from Ann Garrido, and I have told other people I was lucky enough to be with Ann Garrido for an entire day of workshop, and she took us through the book, Redeeming Administration. It's really good. And some of the things we're talking about tonight, I think of the prayer that she said, of those moments where, you know, we're really stretched and we're asked to do quite a bit, and especially in making these decisions. And so I just want everyone to know I appreciate it as much as anyone, what it takes to immerse yourself in some of these decisions. I don't know about all of you, but every time my email goes off, it could be an email that changes the school forever. Like, I'm always aware of that, you know, because you just have no idea what can happen and what the challenges might be. And so what we're hoping to do tonight is just kind of help all of us as we accompany you through this, help all of us just find ways and tools to be able to make these decisions. Marianne?
Yes, just very excited to be with you all. Thank you. I think today, more than ever, ethical decision-making needs to be forefront in our minds. So excited that we've carved out time for this important topic.
So the first thing we would like to do is start with something interactive. So we are going to have everyone in breakout rooms. Kim is going to put you into some breakout rooms, and the task is this: we're asking everyone to we're all going to be working on the same one, and it's the first case study. It is not marked as any case study. The others have letters on them. So if you have the information that Kim sent you, this one begins, Anna is a politically active middle school teacher. So if you have that one prepared, when you go into your room, obviously you want to introduce yourselves, and someone can read it. You can all read it. That can be up to your group. And at the bottom, there's just a few, and we're not going to give you a lot of time for this one, but there's just a few questions. What are the values in conflict here? And what should the principal and president do with Claire's information? So the second question will make sense for you once you kind of read through that. So again, we're hoping that it's a good conversation, and maybe you're all going to see it one way and maybe not. And I think that'll be important for you to determine that, what do we do when we're not all right on the same page at the very beginning of this? And at the end of the evening, we're hoping that it'll be a little bit more clear about a process to do this. So is everyone feeling pretty comfortable that they have that case study up there? It just says Anna's politically active middle school teacher. All right, so as long as, Kim, I think we look pretty good. It looks like there's enough head nods.
Okay.
And we'll call you back in about 10 or so minutes.
Yep.
So it looks like we are back, and we have discussed this ethical dilemma. So one of the questions was simply about the conflict in values or principles. So what did y'all think about that? Any conflicts? Don't be shy.
Well, we talked about, this is Chris Seaver, we talked about privacy issues and posting things to social media without permission, and felt that we had to, first of all, review the policy manual to see what the policy was, and reacquaint perhaps the teachers with that.
Very good, great.
This is Kathy Muskoff. We talked about a lot of different things regarding this, but one of the things that came out was how the trust between two colleagues was breached, and how that might negatively impact the work relationship and the institution. So that was something that we talked about. And also First Amendment rights, and not being judgmental, as well as people are entitled to their opinions. So that's kind of the very general ideas that we discussed.
Fantastic. Yeah. And what should a principal or president do with that information in that situation?
Our group didn't get a chance to really discuss that specifically, but I think what I would like to say about it is, and this goes to the point of one of the comments from one of the other participants, is that use this as a dialogue between the two women, and maybe the president and principal need to mediate that discussion. So maybe that's a way of having it become part of the discussion with the president and the principal.
Thank you. Any other ideas?
Yeah, in our group, we talked about that the principal and the president or head of school should probably check with their handbook and their employee policies and see if there is any reference to social media use in these types of instances. And just before we were about to break up, I was going to reference probably utilizing their HR director if the school has an HR resource to further discuss not only with respect to these two teachers, but to have some policies for the entire school in terms of faculty and administration going forward.
That's great. Wonderful.
Was there any discussion about if it would be problematic that there is a teacher who seems to be fairly anti-LGBT, about how that might affect some of the kids? Did that come up in the, and we know we didn't give you a lot of time, so I'm not sure that you had time to get there, but I'm just curious.
We discussed that, hi, I'm Natalie from Mercy.
Hi, Natalie.
We discussed that, you know, you need to honor the dignity of everybody's, of the individual in the conversation. And that there would have to be multiple layers of conversation, kind of troubleshooting. We were just getting to, you kind of have to be prepared since it's out there on social media that your families, students, other teachers probably definitely have seen it or circulated. And so it would be a good idea to at least make Mesa available, let Mesa know what was going on, and then also get their opinion to make sure that the mission was being upheld in the decisions of the school. But that would be kind of the next, you know, where does Mercy's mission lie in this matter, and that we would have to have follow-up conversations and be able to defend that, knowing that you're going to have people on both sides of that conversation.
Great.
Fantastic.
So much in there, isn't there, in terms of when you start really peeling it apart? And so great. Thank you.
So great, we just got our feet wet with our first little ethical dilemma here. But what we'd like to do moving forward is talk just about some basics about ethical decision-making. Whoops, that didn't go very well. And then decision-making and some actual concrete steps to go through as Mercy Schools to make sure that we are putting the common good in the forefront of our minds. And then we're going to, well, before we don't have that many people, but we will take a look at a couple other scenarios once we learn that. And then Ed is going to help us figure out a way when we are stuck, if we need some an objective viewpoint. So that's what we will do today. All right, so just decision making as a branch of philosophy has been around forever, and it's all based in values and principles, which some people use interchangeably, but really for our purposes, we can think of values as more of the abstract quality that we prioritize. Like honesty would be a value that I have. Principles, on the other hand, are more of the concrete guideline for implementing that value. So honesty might be an important value to me. Maybe the principle I live by is that I will always tell the truth unless it brings harm to too many people. Okay, that might be my principle that I operate by. Or confidentiality may be a great value that I have in my professional life, but the principle I live by is that I will hold everything in confidence unless I believe someone will harm herself or someone else. So that's kind of how they work together. And then, of course, we use those. I love it. Several people talked about our handbooks. Yes, that absolutely works in that way. We have our values inform our principles, and those principles get codified in our handbooks. Okay, several people mentioned that. So that's where we spell out those specific codes of behavior that guides the actual behaviors in our lives. And then over time, people's behavior can influence the priority ranking of values. So it's kind of a cycle that continues to support itself. Along with our values and principles, the other thing that's really important for us as Mercy Schools is our purpose. Our purpose, as outlined specifically in our mission statement, is to educate young people in the Mercy tradition. So that is different. A school's purpose is very different from that of a community center or even a church or a secular organization. So that purpose drives how we interpret our principles and values. So basically, approaches to decision-making, you can kind of divide them in half. Some of the approaches deal with consequences and evaluating how the consequences of the decision. The other half of the approaches are independent of whatever the consequences are. So a couple that you may have heard of, the utilitarianism is meaning trying to get the least amount of pain for the least amount of people, okay? The egoist is basically the utilitarian concept, but it's for me. What's the least amount of pain for me? But then the common good goes beyond that, and it looks for what provides the greatest benefit for the most people, for the whole, and not just individuals, but the whole community. So what provides the greatest benefit for all? Those independent of consequences are kind of the approach, the duty approach, like often military organizations might have that, where regardless of the consequences, a person has a duty to do something. Rights, upholding a person's rights, no matter what the consequences of having those rights or the execution of those rights, and just in the interest of fairness to all or justice for all, regardless of the consequences. So while duty and rights and fairness are parts of the equation, really as Mercy educators and administrators and board members, we try to come down on the side of the common good and to guide us in our decision-making processes. So I'll turn it over to Ed.
Yeah, and this is the title here is why this is important to take so much energy and effort to make these ethical decisions. And it's because we are mission-based organizations and we're driven by that, and all that we do needs to support that and be framed by our mission. So we endeavor to make our decisions consistent with our principles and our values. So whoever we're bringing to the decision-making table has to be very clear about that we are what our principles and values are. And our decisions, of course, are based on faith. And we're going to go through some things a little bit later that are very pertinent to our faith as well and what role that plays. And discernment engages various stakeholders. And we can bring different people in, and we also have to think of what our discernment will mean to other stakeholders. And there's subsidiarity and participation. And subsidiarity, and again, I know that most of you already know this, but it's this idea, this organizing principle that matters ought to be handled at the lowest or least centralized competent authority. So in a school, if there is a situation in a classroom, then obviously the teacher ought to try to handle it first. It shouldn't be something that goes right to the principal or right to the president, certainly not to the board. If there's a sports issue, it's handled by the athletic director. Everything's done at the lowest level that it can be done well. But what we're talking about are things that are going to make its way up to us. But even then, the principle of subsidiarity, I think there's oftentimes we want someone to make the decision for us. But in these cases, at the board level and the head of school level, we are the ones that are most responsible for making the decision. Not, for example, asking, what would Mesa? Does Mesa give us a direct order of what to do here? And they would not, because everything is still a local decision. And I'm going to get to some of that later as well. And discernment fosters a greater buy-in from various stakeholders. When people are feeling listened to and feeling a part of the decision, and they know that the decision makers took all the stakeholders into consideration when they were making these decisions. And so it really is important, even though it can be painstaking at times, it really is important. So the foundations for our decision making, and all of this is referenced in the materials that we sent out, but the first are gospel values. And the Gospels tell us so much about Jesus, and they tell us what the Gospel writers wanted us to know. Who his friends are, who his family were, what he liked, When we contemplate the Gospels, we see that Jesus valued and called his followers to some pretty important values: compassion and mercy, justice, equality, joy, courage, love, reconciliation, and service. And when we reference the gospel values in our own decision making, sometimes we land at the bracelet, WWJD, that was very popular for a while, and without having it be trite, there is something to that. There's something to saying, all right, in this situation, when I think of all the people involved, and the values that we hold dear, what would Jesus have done here? What is the gospel calling us to? There are times, and to me, this is very high level. Bringing gospel values into it is a very high level thing in our particular faith-based schools, because it does really matter. There might be times where the gospel values and the way some people might see certain church teachings could even become, a little bit in conflict. And it's not outrageous to think that it's always been that way. Jesus challenged some of the status quo in the time, and it wound up taking him to his own death. And I think of Catherine McCauley, who had some roadblocks that she recognized she just could not overcome, and so she had to think of another way to go around it. And we know that for her to continue her ministry, it was necessary for her, in her mind, to create a religious order so that she could continue to have the House of Mercy. And so she was looking at the necessity and the need to continue to live the gospel values.
Great, thanks. A second source of our foundation in making decisions, of course, is Catholic social teaching and the church's commitment to justice. And of course, that's all founded in the belief in the dignity of every human person. So in making our decisions, we constantly have to go back to that. What is just for every human person involved, so that they are given the dignity and respect they deserve. And of course, that requires a special concern for the poor and most vulnerable. So part of our decision-making has to be about the people who are most in need. How will this decision affect those who are most in need? And you've got a little handout, review of Catholic social teaching. I think it's very helpful to actually look back at those when you're grappling with an administrative team or board members and making a tough decision, to remind ourselves of those priorities.
And also, we take into consideration Catholic moral theology, and this is, of course, developed over time, and these guiding principles must be understood in their proper context. And this can take, all of this can take a lot of time, far more than the 10 minutes we gave you in your little group, and more than we're going to give you at the end. But to have a pretty good handle on Catholic moral teaching and what the church actually says about things, and what our assent ought to be for some of those. And so there are three levels, and in doctrine, the most serious and demanding level, of course, is dogma. And those are the things to which Christians and Catholics and Christians ought to assent. They are kind of the foundations of our faith. If you think of the Nicene Creed. The next level is referred to as authoritative teaching. And the tradition in the church is held very, very, it's held in very high regard in all circles, and ought to be, because there's been a long tradition of lots of different popes and bishops and synods and teachings that have come out of all of those meetings. And they are the teaching. The Catholic doesn't have to accept the teaching with the assent of faith as the first one, that it was sent by God, because these are things that came post Scripture. But since it is authoritatively presented as church teaching, Catholics really need to accept it as church teaching, respect it, and to do our best to follow the teaching. And that can be difficult at times, because sometimes, like I said, we've all been in those situations where it felt a little bit like there might be a pretty serious push to try to fully understand it in light of the situation that's going on. And the third level is referred to as prudential judgment. And this is teaching directed to moral and social problems in the world, and is usually an attempt to apply Christian moral principles to specific social problems. And again, while we ought to really consider this, herein lies a little bit more of the real give and take of the, what are we thinking about this? How is this going to play out? And when we get into this, the process and the 9 steps of decision making, you'll see where some of this comes into play as well. When issues are perceived differently and a decision must be made, our tradition has always held sacred the appeal to an informed conscience. So I'm paying attention to these, and my conscience can, as long as it's informed, we could have really good, well-meaning, thoughtful people could have a difference of opinion. And you might see that in some of these ethical decisions that you're making in real life.
And the fourth area of foundation for us is mercy documents. And I love this. The mercies have done us a great service. And these documents are everything from the Constitution to the Institute direction statement, statements from the Institute chapters previously, writings on the critical concerns. Those are foundational. Around the social justice priorities. For instance, I think the Mercies, they put out great statements on such issues. Back, a beautiful one that was very helpful to me was on Black Lives Matter. And I've used that. I've couched certain responses to parents by linking to those documents and also linking to Catholic social teaching and the aptly used Bible verse. So I have found relying on the mercy documents to be super helpful. So if that's our foundation, then how do we take that and turn it into a concrete, actual step-by-step process? And really there are 9 steps in it. If ethical decision-making were about choosing between a right outcome and a wrong outcome, there would be 1 step: choose the right thing, okay? Do the right thing. But when it comes to these kind of decisions, we have conflicts between different right outcomes. That's what makes it so hard. So there's 9 different steps to kind of drill down and really get at what we need. So the first thing to do is to decide on who has the authority to make the decision, okay? Is it the administrative team? Is it the president with the board chair? And oftentimes people who are brought into conversations may think that because their viewpoint was sought after, that they have a say in the decision. They have a vote, so to speak. But it's important to clarify where the decision lies. Then once we know that, in the second item, we do need to hear from all stakeholder groups. So rarely does anything just affect students. It's going to affect parents and teachers, community members, donors, board members. So we have to get viewpoints from other stakeholders while they are aware of their role, whether it's contributing feedback or if it's actually part of the decision making. Of course, in number 3, you need to gather all the information and data. Again, part of that could be interviews with all the relevant stakeholders, but others, might be actual hard data. And then in number 4, this takes a little time to identify the benefits and the burdens of possible decisions. Okay, that's where we're thinking through the possible consequences and forcing ourselves to try to identify what might be unintended consequences. Those are often the sneakiest and can be the worst. So we lay all of that out in kind of the first half of these steps.
Next, we determine the key moral commitments and values as well as conflicts among them. For example, Mercy schools are committed to education of students in the traditions of the Sisters of Mercy. and also as a ministry of paying a just wage. And so you consider the conflicts that may arise when deciding to increase tuition or not to increase tuition. You know, who would be affected by this? You know, I often say, I was a theology teacher by trade and then became an administrator. And now that I'm in the role of president and you know, dealing with the business end far more than I was before, you know, people say, well, it's a business, and there's a real truth to that. It's a business, and I always say it's a business with a soul. You know, there's an ethical dimension to just about everything we do, even in the financial realm. Establish rationalities and priorities among our commitments and values. You know, for example, do we increase funding to enhance campus ministry versus school athletics? And depending on where our priorities are, you know, there can be some conflict there as well. And that to me is a very real one. And you know, typically people stand in wherever they stand on something depends on where they sit. And you know, we've seen, you know, people pretty convinced that the resources should be put in their particular area. And so even those can be minor. They don't rise to the board level always, but sometimes they do, certainly when making the budget. Examine the major options and evaluate the positive and negative consequences of these options on the identified priorities. How will this decision impact our priorities? And we need to develop options that express the priorities in light of our foundational principles and explore the practical implications of the decision. There are times in some of these, in this process, where the conversation might stay for a while at a pretty philosophical position. And what about this? And then you start introducing, what are the practical implications? Okay, so if we make this decision, what happens tomorrow at 8 o'clock when everyone shows up? How's that going to look? And so you start to look at some of those things as well. And we investigate the foreseeable repercussions from the decisions. At times it's a little bit like chess. You have to see, you know, where is this, if I do this, where is this ultimately going to land? And in all of this, we have to ensure the dignity of each person affected by the decision. So this can be arduous for sure, but very important that all of those stakeholders, all of those voices are represented. And then we gain consensus on the decision, and we evaluate, you know, whether there is consensus. And ethical discernment doesn't require absolute consensus. You've probably been in experiences where there was a little bit of dissension, but it wasn't so bad that the person couldn't come to it and understand at least the group's decision process. But it does need to examine whether or not there exists any significant opposition. We were having a discussion here, a real life discussion that was very, very important for our school. And I had the board chair on the phone, and I said, you know, here's another position that someone's making. And it was the minority position for sure. And the board member said, well, who is it? What kind of, not what kind of power, but what role does the person have? How loud is the voice in this decision? And I told him, I said, it's the principal. He said, okay, then we've got to really kind of, and then he talked to the principal. He said, you know, tell me what you're thinking. And it was very, very important that in the end, the principal was okay with coming to us because he knew that he was listened to, and it was really good because we didn't just presume consensus. We made sure to really listen. And then the last part, you conduct an evaluation of the decision-making process that resulted in the course of action. Is there any systemic issues brought to light that need to be examined? I would say this about this, and again, all of you are you know your place way better than I do. All we're doing is just, you know, suggesting some things. But in my mind, I would trust the process. If I know when we do this at our school, I really trust the process that we did our best. But I'm open in an evaluation to say, you know what, it might not have been the best decision. Now that I look at it in an evaluative way, maybe the other decision would have been better perhaps. But we trusted what we were doing. It's okay to go back, I think, and say, given what we've learned, this can help us as a tool the next time we have to make a decision, because we've done some pretty clear evaluation.
Great. So we dove into an ethical dilemma. We talked about different approaches to ethical decision making, and then how that kind of can be used in a step-by-step actual concrete process to make decisions. So let's apply our decision-making process, all right? So we will not have 4 because we don't need that many, but you have some case studies that are labeled. We're gonna do different ones. Kim will split you into 2 groups. So group 1 will do case study A, and group 2 will do case study C. Okay, so A is 1, C is 2. And we'd like you to take some time to read through it and then really think about these steps. And if you were responsible for making that decision with your group there, what would you do? How would you go about implementing this decision-making process? And what would you decide? What result would you come up with? So I think we can do that until, 15 after, quarter after?
It's about 10 to 7 now.
Okay.
So
Maybe a good 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay,
20
20
minutes.
minutes, that's great.
And again, we're comfortable listening just to your process as well. Was it really easy to make this decision, or was there some, differing of opinion, and that could be good. That to me is very realistic to happen in these situations.
And then when we're called back together, we'd like to ask you to share your case and kind of how that process went and what thoughts your group had. Great, we are back. So I hope you had some good discussion. So I'd like to start with group number 1, case A. If we could have someone just tell us a little bit about the case for the other folks, and then let us know a little bit about your discussion, please.
Marianne, could you unshare so then we could see?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Kathy, were you going to lead, or do you?
Sure. So our case study was about a teacher who is in an elementary school and is unmarried and finds herself to be with child. She doesn't live with the dad, and but does want the father to be involved with her son's life. So we had to talk about the head of school said that, recognized that there was a lot of conflicting values and came to the board for assistance in her discernment. The things that we considered as, that the church believes that having a child should be within the bonds of marriage, but that it's also that the church is pro-life. So we had those 2 ethical issues to talk about. So our question was, what advice would we give to the head of school? And we looked at the different things that we examined in our discussion earlier, and it wasn't easy. There were a lot of things to consider, and and depending, and we all seem to agree that depending on the age of the child in the school. And we felt that there would probably be a different discussion for, involving an elementary school, as this particular case study is, and a discussion with a situation like this in the high school. Members of my group, is there anything else that we should be adding to that?
How did the conversation go in terms of the difference between, say, a high school and a grade school?
Well, the big difference was we felt that the parents would be a greater stakeholder in the elementary school than in the high school. That there would need to be, that there is more communication with elementary school parents than there probably is with high school parents. So we felt that that was a big difference right there, that there would be, that the parents would be a greater stakeholder in this particular situation.
Anybody else in the A? Yeah, Natalie?
I was going to say, in answering that question too, that, you know, little kids tend to have millions of questions. And as a belly gets bigger, more and more questions come. And high school kids sometimes are just like, so it's like, oh, they're pregnant and move on with their day. And so you just have to be prepared for that and then know that the parents are much more involved at the elementary level.
Okay, good points. Okay,
We
cool.
also thought it was important to be sensitive to the fact that the children in the school may have parents who are also unmarried, and that you can't
Great point.
totally shame this teacher because then the child's going to bring that home to their parents.
That's a great point.
We also talked about how it's important to have consistency between male faculty members and female faculty members. So even though men can't experience pregnancy, they may be in a relationship with an unwed mother and going through something very similar.
It's a great point.
If he teaches at a different school, he's not under any scrutiny, right? More than likely. Yeah. Those are really good points.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Lots of different values involved, lots of different principles.
Yeah, we also discussed the different regions, and if you're in a particularly conservative region, you're going to be coming to your decision making with a different set of opinions probably than if you're in a more liberal region of the country. So, and if you're dealing with a conservative archdiocese, or if you're dealing with just mercy leadership. So, you know, with that we discussed that as well.
Yeah, and it's Kathy, right?
Yes.
And that's exactly what we're saying is why this has to be so carefully weighed out, because as you say, the ordinary, the archbishop or the bishop could have a great weight in how he thinks this should go, and it's not unimportant to recognize that. However, in lots of times the documents of the Sisters of Mercy, the gospel values, they might call us to decide otherwise, and so here you are in a very real situation. So we were wondering if the bishop's role might show up, and we thought if it did, it would be in case study A. So very interesting.
Lots of layers to it. All right, group 2 had case study C. Could someone tell us about that?
Well, I'll start, I guess. If anyone from our group wants to jump in, please do. But this case study was about an athletic director who was with the school for approximately 30 years plus. Tons of accolades, tons of accomplishments. Has coached Olympic players, brought tons of teams to state titles, etc. And so because of the sports programs that he develops and he's a part of, the athletic budget is fairly sizable. So it's probably pretty easy that if someone, probably isn't paying attention to every single expense, because it sounds like that was a sizable budget. And the principal was somewhat surprised when the financial officer of the school came to him to show some discrepancies with respect to this athletic director that is widely admired, highly ethical, 30 years with the school, that there were some strange discrepancies on the credit card statements. And so when the principal approached the athletic director, the situation turned worse in the fact that those discrepancies were due to, I think it was an oxycodone or some type of painkiller that he was buying, and he charged it to his school credit card because he was trying to hide his addiction due to a knee injury and surgery that he had experienced from his wife. So opiates on school property is a reportable and prosecutable offense in the state. And the principal needed to gather a carefully selected group of people to figure out where they were going to go with this. So as a group, we discussed that carefully selected group would be the obviously head of school, the principal, the board chair, I think an HR person, if they had that person on staff, or their outside resource, and possibly the school legal counsel, and to figure out what those next steps were, and to adhere to the missions and values with respect to mercy. But it's a tricky situation. So to maintain someone's dignity, but to also recognize the fact that fraud is involved, and someone that has a substance abuse issue that needs to be addressed, and yet someone admired and beloved by the school and probably the greater community at large, provides for a challenging resolution. So I'm not sure if anyone else from the group wants to pick it up from
Heather,
here.
you nailed that, man.
Yeah.
Good for you. You get to set it up. Let them decide what the final decision was.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think we landed where we landed that, it was likely that Tom was going to have to be terminated, but done in a way that was, compassionate, and perhaps in working with him, allow him to maintain his dignity by saying, look, I'm going to, after 30 years in this, tough knee surgery, I'm going to retire now, and handle it in that fashion, while also ensuring that as part of his release, A, there's a confidentiality that's signed, and B, though, that there's some continuation of benefits, so he is able to address his addiction issue, and hopefully, put that behind him. So I think we hemmed and hawed. It's a tough one. The guy's been there for 30 years. He's well regarded in the community. Maybe he has a sterling, employment record, and it's one infraction, but it's a pretty serious infraction. Again, you do have compassion for him if he has his substance abuse issue, but by the same token, he's having substances sent to schools. Just a huge problem, huge lapse of judgment, of course, for him. In this, and I don't know if that's really recoverable. So I think we sadly, I think, landed at that.
Wow.
We didn't come out of the gates with vigor that was the right thing to do. I think we really, you got the rest of my team tell me, I think we deliberated on that, but we did feel that, the overriding, dignity and compassion were some of the drivers there, but we also had to ensure that we were making the right decision for the institution.
We also recognize that we are going to have to deal with the athletes and the soccer moms and dads who feel their child is being cheated because the athletic director is no longer there, and what happened, why this happened. There's going to be that community aspect feedback that we have to be prepared to deal with, because there will be that repercussion from some individuals.
Absolutely.
See, and that's that is really embracing all of the stakeholders when you think of it, because then you're going to tell the admissions director, hey, we still need a good freshman class. And they're going to say, okay, but our calling card is athletics in a lot of ways. And we just, whether you like it or not, no one thinks he really resigned. And so we have to now deal with where this is going. So yeah, it is. And again, it's created to be very complex. And so, yeah, well done, man. That's great. Anything else from there? That was really good. And we're hearing from everyone, which is really nice.
Well, we had an unfair advantage. Penny is in HR, so.
Yeah, I could tell when she said terminated. Yeah.
But I think the group really was pained with the discussion.
Yeah.
It makes perfect sense.
Yeah. And we prayerfully look at it, and we go through it all when you think of it. And in the end, it is painful. And we said that right from the very beginning. These are difficult things. And they might be, Denise, as you're saying, this might be a school changing decision. It really could be.
Yeah.
May I ask a question?
Mm-hmm.
It says in the next to last paragraph on this case study C, possession of opiates on school property is a reportable and prosecutable offense in the state. So that's a state law, is that correct? Or is
That's
that
how
just-
we interpreted it.
That's how, yeah, I would think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, because I was going to say if it was a school policy, would there be some discretion and then possibly an arrangement for treatment and things like that could
Right.
be discussed?
And I think that's where we started. That was the starting point for us. But as we talked more through it, I think we moved off of that position. And we didn't know what the circumstances would be of reporting it to the state in terms of disclosure and whatnot. We didn't know that. So we just, went again on sometimes at this point to protect the institution.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and if you have a DA that sees it differently, then, it's, yeah, very good.
Great discussion. So as you found from those, there in both of those, you found many layers. And when you're choosing between multiple values that may conflict, sometimes we need an external, more objective voice, and MESA provides that for us. So Ed's going to take us through that.
Yeah, so as Kim had mentioned, Marianne and I are both members of the Ethics Committee, and it's a really good group of people, and it's comprised of heads of schools, dean of students, campus ministry, counselors, people who just really care about mercy, and it's not a body of people that protest to be experts in anything other than they're willing to help schools as they're going through some of these decisions. So the way I think we would see it is probably just an extra tool, because there might be times if you take these cases, there might be times where you say, we're not sure. We're just not sure. We brought a bunch of really good people in. We paid attention to the gospel values and the documents of the sisters and Catholic social teaching. And we're at a point where we would just like one more voice, one more set of eyes on this. And so schools are able to bring that to the ethics committee. When might this happen? When school leadership faces delicate decisions that can affect the school's integrity, identity, or reputation. When ethical questions and challenges might arise from faculty, parents, students, other stakeholders like alumni. When their financial irregularities may force administration to evaluate its policies and integrity, and persons from outside the institution, media, diocesan officials may challenge the school's Catholic identity. So to make sure that this is really what we want to do and in line with MESA and the Sisters of Mercy, you might contact the ethics committee. And the way to do this is the head of school or assistant head of school, after a great discussion, including obviously the board chair, if it's something this important, contacts Sister Lisa, who will contact Sister Pat Talone to assemble the ethics committee. And she is the leader of the ethics committee. And the format that the consultation takes is the information is gathered from those involved. Points of view will be elicited, respected, and weighed. Tell us more about your particular situation. So like Kathy, like you were saying, well, where do you live? Okay, what is the makeup of your archdiocese? What's the tenor of the people around you? It gives the ethics committee that doesn't maybe live in your area an understanding a little bit more of those particularities. And there will be always at least 4 people from the ethics committee will be there, along with the people from the requesting school. So we would meet together either in person, or typically it's done by Zoom, even not in a pandemic, just because travel keeps us from always being together. So usually it's video or telephone conference. And then there will be great documentation of the whole process with attributions, stating the recommendation with a written summary and a response to the requesters either verbally or in writing. It's very important that we've been stressing this to everyone, that this is consultative. This is not determining body of people. We're not going to say, you know, this is what you have to do. But again, just to have a really objective voice at it is important. You know, Tom Robertson, the athletic director that won a bunch of championships, and he's got the school. If you've been there a long time, you are friends with him and you're in this, and it is difficult. It really is. Whereas the ethics committee goes, okay, but we get it, but here's what he did. Would it be any different if the teams were bad? Would you see this any differently, or do we just like Tom? You know, we would be able to kind of provide maybe some more objective, not that schools aren't being. I sit in the position that a lot of you are in, and it's easy to be clouded by, you know, protecting the school's integrity, protecting the reputation, making sure that enrollment can still be strong, you know, all of those. But those can never replace making a proper ethical decision. So so we understand how difficult it is, and I think it's nice that the sisters have created this ethics committee as one more tool along with all the others that we presented tonight.
And how long has the ethics committee been in existence?
I would say 2 years probably. We trained, we were in training for a full year. We would gather, and we actually have one school did request to talk with us about something, and it was really good, very informative, and we knew how difficult the situation was. We did not offer the decision. We just said, we understand, and here are our positions. So it is relatively new, Kathy. I think that, to me, that feels new.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Great. Well, now we're ready to solve all the world's problems, aren't we? All right. So any final closing thoughts? Or Kim, if you had any business you wanted to wrap up with?
I just want to emphasize, you know, the fact that we provided all of these resources, and, you know, the heads of school and board chairs have received, you know, these and similar resources in the past, but, you know, use them with, use the case studies, work them with your administrative teams and your boards. I will be sending out the PowerPoint. And Ed and Marianne are also going to provide us with some additional resources. So I will be following up. So thank you for participating, but I especially want to thank Ed and Marianne for all of their many efforts in putting this presentation together and really helping us to think along the lines of ethical decision making. So Ed, Marianne, thank you for really highlighting the approaches to ethical decision making and how it's influenced by our principles and values, for stressing the importance of, you know, really looking at things through the lens of what is the common good, clarifying why this is so important, as our schools are faith-based and mission-based institutions, and the importance of that discernment, you know, that real prayerful discernment, and just really going through all the steps and building the foundation of why this is important. And I guess I'll leave you with Ed's words of wisdom of, you know, thinking about what would Jesus do is really also very important, and going back to our gospel values. So thank you so much for all of this. Thank you to all of you. And if you have any additional questions or need any additional resources, please do not hesitate to reach out to us.